New York City. At the United Nations headquarters, the Palestinian question takes centre stage at a special summit during the General Assembly. Leaders from around the world gather, not simply to debate history, but to weigh the future of one of the most enduring conflicts of our time. The mood in the chamber is heavy with expectation. For decades, the idea of a two-state solution has hovered over negotiations, but this summit carries a sense of urgency, of shifting global winds. Delegations from Europe, Africa, the Middle East and Asia file in. Cameras capture their arrival. Emmanuel Macron of France, Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, Annalena Baerbock of Germany, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Each represents not only their own nation, but a voice in a broader chorus. Yet two delegations are conspicuously absent: Israel and the United States. Their empty seats will become one of the most powerful images of the day, a silence that speaks volumes. French President Emmanuel Macron formally opens the proceedings. His words, delivered in French, mark the resumption of this high-level plenary session dedicated to the peaceful resolution of the Palestinian question and the two-state solution. His speech is greeted with applause from the Palestinian delegation. The camera pans across the room, applause on one side, empty chairs on another. The visual contrast illustrates both momentum and division. Then the summit's tone is sharpened by the voice of UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. With unmistakable clarity, he reminds the Assembly that statehood for the Palestinians is not a gift to be granted, but a right long denied. He warns that denying recognition would fuel extremism worldwide, and that without two states, there can be no peace in the Middle East. His words hang over the chamber like a challenge not only to the absent Israelis and Americans, but to every leader present. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez follows. He calls this conference a historic milestone, yet he stresses it is only the beginning. His proposal is specific. Palestine must be granted full membership in the United Nations on equal footing with every other state, and the process must not drag on. His demand is clear. Recognition through words must be matched by recognition through action. Egypt's Prime Minister Mostafa Madbouly speaks next, linking recognition with the urgent humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He pledges that once a ceasefire is secured, Egypt will host a global reconstruction conference to rebuild Gaza and mobilize Arab Islamic plans for recovery. His message resonates beyond diplomacy. Recognition cannot mean survival on paper alone. It must mean survival in homes, schools and hospitals for the Palestinian people. From Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, strikes a similar tone. She announces the creation of a dedicated European instrument for Gaza's reconstruction, calling on international donors to join in. But she also adds a sobering note: only Israelis and Palestinians can ultimately decide their future. The role of the international community, she insists, is to keep hope alive until the parties themselves find the courage to reconcile. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney offers realism. He acknowledges that recognition is no panacea, no quick solution to decades of mistrust and violence. But he places Canada's support firmly on the principles of self-determination and human rights enshrined in the UN Charter. By aligning with a coordinated effort led by France and Saudi Arabia, Carney frames Canada's move as one of principle and pragmatism, a step toward keeping the possibility of peace alive. Then comes Belgium's Prime Minister Bart De Wever, whose words draw both attention and caution. Belgium, he declares, will recognise Palestine legally only once Hamas is removed from governance and hostages are released. He sets conditions tied to demilitarisation and democratic renewal, promising an embassy and full diplomatic ties only once these benchmarks are met. His statement reflects Europe's cautious approach, where recognition is seen not just as symbolic but conditional on internal reform. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese narrows the lens to the day after recognition. He stresses that recognition must be followed by reconstruction, reform and credible peace plans. Gaza must be rebuilt, Israel must be secure, and Hamas must be excluded from governance, not just in principle, but in daily practice. For him, recognition is not an end, but the start of a process that must be managed carefully, cooperatively and collectively. And then South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa adds a voice of solidarity rooted in history. He welcomes the groundswell of international support for Palestine, noting that 142 nations now back its establishment. His words carry the weight of South Africa's own past, drawing a quiet parallel between the Palestinian struggle and his nation's long fight against apartheid. As the speeches unfold, a pattern emerges. The calls for recognition are near universal, yet the conditions attached vary. Spain demands immediate UN membership. Egypt focuses on rebuilding Gaza. The European Union pushes resources but calls for local leadership. Canada ties its support to principle, Belgium to conditions on Hamas, Australia to reconstruction, and South Africa to solidarity. Each voice adds a different texture to the larger mosaic, a chorus both united and fractured. But while leaders speak, the absence of Israel and the United States looms over the chamber. The empty chairs of two powerful nations act as silent counter-arguments to the calls for recognition. For the Palestinians, applause signals hope. For skeptics, silence underscores resistance. The divide is not only geographic but philosophical. Should recognition precede negotiations, or must negotiations come first? This summit, however, signals a shift in global sentiment. For decades, recognition of Palestine was largely symbolic, backed by some nations, rejected by others, ignored by many. Now it has moved from the margins to the center of global diplomacy. Leaders openly discuss reconstruction funds, diplomatic conditions, and UN membership as if recognition is no longer hypothetical but inevitable. The implications are profound. If Palestine becomes a full UN member, it would alter the dynamics of international law, bilateral relations, and negotiations with Israel. It would give Palestinians greater legitimacy on the world stage, but could also deepen the rift with nations opposed to recognition. The absence of the US suggests Washington is unwilling, at least for now, to support such a move, fearing its impact on Israeli security and its influence in the region. Yet global politics is shifting. The summit reflects a new alignment where European nations, Arab states, and countries from the global south find common ground. In a world redefined by crises in Ukraine, Taiwan, and climate change, the Palestinian question is once again forcing its way into the spotlight as a test of the international community's willingness to address injustice. For Palestinians, this moment is both symbolic and strategic. Symbolic because applause from world leaders echoes their long-held demand for recognition. Strategic because reconstruction pledges and UN membership proposals could turn symbolism into practical gains. But the road ahead is fraught with obstacles: internal Palestinian divisions, the presence of Hamas, ongoing Israeli security concerns, and the enduring absence of consensus among the world's most powerful nations. For Israelis, the summit presents both a challenge and a warning. A growing number of nations now recognize Palestine, and the momentum could isolate Israel diplomatically if it remains opposed. For the United States, silence at the summit speaks of its reluctance to break with its closest Middle Eastern ally, but that silence also risks ceding influence to other powers: France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and even South Africa, who are shaping the conversation. As the summit draws to a close, one conclusion becomes clear: Palestinian statehood is no longer a fringe demand, but a mainstream expectation in much of the world. Recognition may still be debated, delayed, or conditional, but it has moved to the center of international diplomacy. The UN summit in New York, marked by applause, pledges, and empty chairs, may not deliver peace tomorrow, but it has redrawn the diplomatic map of the conflict. For Palestinians, this is a moment of momentum. For Israelis, a moment of caution. For the world, a moment of reckoning. The question is no longer whether recognition is possible, but whether it will be the first step toward peace, or yet another chapter in a conflict that refuses to end. And so, as the cameras fade from New York, one truth remains undeniable: the question of Palestine has returned to the forefront of world politics, and the call for recognition is louder than it has ever been.
La 5e séance plénière de la
The
conférence
fifth plenary meeting
internationale
of the
de haut niveau
high-level
pour le
international
règlement
conference
pacifique de
for
la
the
question de
peaceful settlement
Palestine
of the question of
et la mise en
Palestine
œuvre de la
and the
solution des deux
implementation
États
of the
reprend.
two-state solution is resumed.
Time has come because there's a pressing urgency everywhere and for our universal conscience. We condemn it unequivocally because nothing in Gaza with the stated objective of destroying Hamas. But hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Forcefully condemned the terrorist attacks committed on the 7th of October 2023. He reiterated his young man when I learned of the horrible assassination of Yitzhak Rabin.
Je remercie le secrétaire
I
général
thank
de
the Secretary
l'Organisation
General
des
of
Nations
the
Unies. Je remercie Madame la Présidente
I thank
de l'Assemblée
the
générale.
President of the General Assembly.
J'invite à présent
the Prime Minister of Belgium.
Stage, and let's be clear, statehood for the Palestinians is a right, not a reward. And denying statehood would be a gift to extremists everywhere. Without two states, there will be no peace in the Middle East, and radicalism will spread around the world.
Excellency.
Excelencias, esta conferencia marca un hito trascendental, pero no es el final del camino, debe ser el principio. Por eso quiero hacer dos propuestas. La primera es que el Estado de Palestina debe ser miembro de pleno derecho en Naciones Unidas. Se debe completar lo antes posible el procedimiento de ingreso del Estado de Palestina en esta organización en pie de igualdad con el resto de Estados. Y en segundo lugar,
ستقوم مصر بمجرد التوصل لوقف إطلاق النار باستضافة المؤتمر الدولي لإعادة الإعمار في قطاع غزة لحشد التمويل اللازم للخطة العربية الإسلامية لإعادة الإعمار بالتنسيق مع الحكومة الفلسطينية بما يضمن بقاء الشعب الفلسطيني على أرضه ومساعدته على تجاوز الخسائر الجسيمة التي سببها العدوان. وإنني أدعو كل شركائنا في المجتمع الدولي للمساهمة في هذا الجهد للتعافي المبكر ولإعادة الإعمار بوصفه جزءاً لا يتجزأ من أي تحرك جدي لتحويل حل الدولتين إلى واقع ملموس. السيدات والسادة، إننا نقف اليوم أمام لحظة
We'll set up a dedicated instrument for Gaza's reconstruction in coordination with other donors' efforts. Gaza must be rebuilt, the Palestinian economy must be relaunched, and I invite all of you to join in the effort to make this happen. Of course, in the end, only the Israelis and the Palestinians can agree on the way forward. But the international community has so much to contribute. We can facilitate, we can rebuild, but most importantly, we can keep hope alive. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, Canada is under no illusions that this recognition is a panacea. This recognition is, however, firmly aligned with the principles of self-determination and fundamental human rights in the UN Charter, and it is fundamentally consistent with the policy of the Canadian government for generations. We take this action as part of a coordinated effort led by France and Saudi Arabia, a coordinated effort to provide the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. Recognizing the state of Palestine
will proceed to the legal recognition of the state of Palestine once all hostages have been released and all terrorist organizations such as Hamas have been removed from the governance of Palestine. The effective conduct of diplomatic relations with the new state of Palestine, including the opening of a Belgian embassy, and the conclusion of international agreements will be carried out once the objectives of the New York Declaration have been achieved, notably the full demilitarization of Hamas and subsequent the renewal of governments based on presidential and parliamentary elections, giving the Palestinians a democratic, strengthened and renewed authority. All these steps are intended to guarantee
that future depends on recognition being followed by reconstruction and reform. A credible, cooperative peace plan supporting recovery in Gaza and security for Israel. Establishing governance and excluding Hamas on the day after and every day after that. This is the next step we must take, and we must take it together. I thank you very much.
I would like to welcome the demonstrable groundswell of support for the establishment of the much-awaited state of Palestine by 142 nations.